for that. So, having talked about history, let's move on now and talk about archaeology, memorably described as the study of durable rubbish. I like that. What is archaeology good for in regard to what we're talking about today? Archaeology does not prove the Bible is from God, but it does establish and support the Bible's credibility as a reliable record. Let's look at a few examples. In Luke chapter 3, verse 1, Luke mentions a chap called Lysanias. Luke mentions him as being at Abilene or Abila. Now, like Josephus, an earlier a Jewish writer who we talked about earlier, mentions Lysanias at Chalcis, and indeed he ruled at Chalcis about 50 or perhaps even 60 years earlier than when Luke is talking about Lysanias being at Abilene about, say, 27 AD. Now, everybody thought that Luke was wrong and that he had simply used another old name from somewhere and inserted it and made it up. And they thought he was wrong because there wasn't any evidence of Lysanias being a tetrarch at Abilene around that time until an inscription turned up on a temple at Abila, other name for Abilene, showing that this chap was there at the time of Tiberius between 14 and 37 AD. And so what we discover is that Luke was not wrong, but in fact there were two Lysaniases, one ruling earlier and one ruling later. Luke was right. In Acts chapter 17, to give another example, we have mentioned city officials or politarchs. It was disputed for a long time that Luke had this right, that perhaps he just made something up or he made a mistake, because there was no specific evidence of a position of authority or significance called a politarch. However, not that long ago, an arch from the 1st century was discovered with the inscription in the time of the politarchs. And indeed now in Thessalonica, which is what's going on in Acts chapter 17, that's where they are, there are now 35 inscriptions, several of them in Thessalonica, which mention politarchs. And so again, Luke has been proved right. Luke, of course, wrote not only the book of Luke, but also Acts as well. Now, another thing that's been brought up is Jericho. In Luke chapter 18, Luke says that Jesus was walking into Jericho, whereas in Mark chapter 10, Mark records Jesus as walking out of Jericho. There we go. The Bible is not trustworthy because the writers are contradicting one another. However, recent archaeology at the site of Jericho, or more accurately we might say sites, revealed that there were 4 sites of Jericho up to 1/4 of a mile apart, and therefore it would be perfectly possible to be walking into Jericho from one perspective and walking out of Jericho from another, and therefore both Mark and Luke are correct looking at it from different perspectives. Luke is a very interesting author. In his writings in the book of Luke and in the book of Acts, he records 32 countries, 54 cities, 9 islands, and there are no mistakes. Now that's remarkable if he was fabricating the stories he's writing about. One other piece of archaeology I rather like is the inscription that's been discovered at Caesarea Maritima with the words Pontius Pilate, the prefect of Judea, confirming the Bible's record that Pontius Pilate was there in Judea, which has been disputed by some historians, but archaeology has shown us that the Bible's record is accurate. In John chapter 5, we have a mention of a pool at Bethesda with 5 porticos. It was disputed that this was made up because such a thing had not been discovered, and so the porticos had not been found. But again, archaeological research not that long ago discovered the pool 40 feet below ground. No wonder there was some skepticism. It was not obvious to the naked eye. But the pool of Bethesda was found 40 feet below ground, and guess how many porticos there were? 5. And so again, the Bible's record is shown to be accurate. The Dead Sea Scrolls are very interesting and have provoked a great deal of interest and research over the last 50, 60 years since they were found. They were discovered at Qumran, the red lettering there on your map, just due south of Jericho and about 20 miles east of Jerusalem. They were discovered in caves between 1947 and 1956, hundreds of manuscripts from as early as 250 BC onwards. They were hidden before destruction by the Romans and contain vast numbers of copies of Old Testament scriptures which agree with the versions used by Christians. This was a disputed matter because up until relatively recently, the only copies we had of the Old Testament were from 1000 AD. However, these copies are from before the time of Jesus and fit very, very accurately together with what we already had. And many of the Old Testament scriptures contain prophecies about the Messiah, prophecies about the one who was to come, and indeed who was Jesus Christ. And these were clearly now, we can show, written before the time of Jesus. They weren't made up by the Christians afterwards to make it look as if Jesus had fulfilled prophecy. They were written many years before, and archaeology has shown us this. Well, and in archaeology, the digging goes on. Bible places that are around today or are being dug up, Bible names are found on archaeological digs, and more digging provides more positive evidence for the reliability of the Bible. Consider this statement. If the Bible was a fabrication, then the more evidence that was uncovered, the more likely it would be that something contradictory to the Bible would be found. However, the opposite is the case. The more that's dug up, the more it confirms the Bible's record instead of casting doubt upon it. So we talked about history, we talked about archaeology. Let's talk for a few minutes about the manuscripts. We talked a little bit, in a sense, talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls, but let's talk about some more things to do with